All right, g'day. Welcome back to Collectivitis, podcast where we dissect the disease that is collectivism. My name's Pietro. We've got with us today a recurring friend of the show, long time guest, I guess, in the context of how long we've been going for. He's the elected Libertarian member for the Upper House in New South Wales, Mr. John Ruddick. How are you?
Good afternoon, Pietro. Lovely to see you. Thanks for inviting me. And it's a great week for libertarians with what's event in Argentina.
It is a great week. So we talked about it a little bit last week about Javier Milei, and we shared some of our favorite quotes of his. He's very disparaging of the left and certainly unabashed in the way that he pushes libertarianism. But I know that you've been talking a lot about Javier Milei in not only kind of to your audience, but also in Parliament, explicitly asking questions of the Treasurer to see if he'll be following what Javier Milei has been doing in Argentina, which I thought was very interesting, very entertaining as well. So given that you are quite a fan of Javier Milei, I thought it'd be good to get you on board to ask you a little bit about what you think the repercussions might be of this and your thoughts on Milei in general. So I suppose the first question is, I wonder how long have you been following Javier Milei for? Would you consider yourself an expert on kind of his rise?
Okay, well, look, I've got Robert Cribb on my staff who's been raving on about Javier Milei for 2.5 years.
Okay.
And this is when he was, I don't even think he was a member of Parliament or the Congress. And so Rob has been telling me, look, there is this really fantastic guy. And he, he was saying, that he might be the president. And so we have been following it all very closely. Now, look, he is a very inspiring figure, Javier Milei, because, look, he has, I have lived my life being an admirer of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, Milton Friedman. Okay, and I believe these guys did a lot of good for the world. It wasn't just in their own countries, but the rest of the third world, because of Thatcherism and Reaganism, at places like India, China, Southeast Asia, Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, most of the world, Eastern Europe, Russia. Most of these people have, as a result of the leadership of Reagan and Thatcher, have said, look, free markets work. We've got to be, and that's been good. It's lifting billions of people out of poverty. However, Javier Milei makes Reagan and Thatcher look like pussycats. Okay, and that he is, he is officially a politician because he's just got elected the president of Argentina, which is not an insignificant country. It's about 50% bigger than Australia. And obviously it was wealthy in the past. But so on the one hand, on paper, he's a politician, but he's absolutely not a politician because a politician is very careful about what they say. Okay, so they might believe some certain things, but they'll sort of have to, they won't be, they don't want to say exactly what they believe because they're worried about votes. Javier Milei absolutely, and look, even Reagan and Thatcher would have been, were very much politicians, very successful ones, and thank God they were. But Milei is not a politician. He doesn't care what people think. He uses bad language all the time, very bad language, okay, because he just doesn't care. He's an ideologue. He's a force of nature. And so that part of him is, to see such a pure ideologue is fascinating and inspiring because I agree with what he's saying. But there is another part of Javier Milei, putting aside the policies, which is his extraordinary charisma and his extraordinary confidence. So he has very unusual hairstyle, unusual dress sense. As I said, uses bad language. And he's just, he's very forceful, and he's very, very, very blunt. So look, all these things are good electorally. That's why he just won 56% of the vote. So it is a fascinating real-time experiment which is unfolding before us in Argentina.
I've seen a lot of, especially when trying to disparage him, the media will compare him to Trump. And you can see like the correlation there, like the charisma, the fact that he's willing to say things that up until they had appeared on the scene, it seemed like these were things that couldn't be said. Like, who knew that you could say, the 10,000 obscenities which Milei has said about the left and the socialists, who knew that you could say what Trump says about, the fake media and the fake news and all of this. And you can see that there's some correlation there. Obviously, to us, Milei being an ideological purist, an anarcho-capitalist, a libertarian, throws him to a whole new level and a whole new stage, and something that I think that Milei is extraordinary in, not even what he can achieve, but what he's already achieved, is he's shown that libertarianism can enter the mainstream. Now, this is something that cannot be overstated. Like, we, the most optimistic of libertarians in Australia and in the US, hadn't even considered for a moment that we could go straight from, nothing to actually having the reins of a country, which is objectively what he's done over how long's it been since Milei first entered to the point where he's gotten today. He's risen from zero to actually being able to enact these things. So I think before we talk about what Milei can actually do now that he has the reins, do you think there's of course there's lessons, but what do you think are the primary lessons that we should take as Australians, as the US, as libertarians, anywhere in the world, from the fact that he has achieved something that until, even 6 months ago, we thought was impossible, objectively impossible?
Milei teaches libertarians around the world that boldness is best. We should absolutely not pussyfoot around with what we believe in. Now, it is true that what we believe in, is radical, and many people will find shocking. Okay, but we've got the facts on our side. We've got objective reality on our side. So if we're not going to make the case for a anarcho-capitalist state as the ideal, then who is? And the anarcho-capitalist state is the ideal. Now, I probably differ from most anarcho-capitalists, and I say, look, I think this is something that's going to have to be phased in over a couple of decades, possibly 3 or 4 decades. We don't want chaos. We want anarcho-capitalism to make the world a better place, okay, and to be a moral system of government. Well, there won't be a government, but to bring this about, look, we could do a lot of reforms very quickly. Abolishing, the gender inclusion department and all these silly things. The global boiling stuff can all get thrown out the window very quickly. But then would that have to be a transition with the education system? We'd probably first use school vouchers, and then we would start to phase out the school vouchers. Same with the healthcare, the police, the courts. Now, the last one would be the defense. But anyway, regardless of what the time is, if we've got a presidential leader or prime minister who is an anarcho-capitalist like Javier Milei, and then we can get the people on board and the Congress, the legislature on board, then I think we can move ahead on this thing. But in terms of the lesson of Javier Milei is boldness pays dividends. Let's not pussyfoot around.
I think Javier Milei himself has said, he's an anarcho-capitalist in the medium term, or in like the medium future, but in the short term, he's a minarchist, because you can't turn that ship around 180 within such a short time frame. The things he campaigned on most interestingly were the dollarization of the economy, which I'm sure we understand is a halfway measure, because even the US dollar is not particularly sound money. But compared to the Argentinian money, of course, it would be. And the other thing he's railed against is closing, ending central banks, which, again, we understand as anarcho-capitalists to be kind of the nexus of power of the state. It's how they do everything that they do without having to mirror it with raising taxes. They just devalue money and manipulate money. Now, it may seem like a simple policy, but those of us who kind of know how the state operates, closing the central banks is something that they are going to fight, and not just the banks themselves, the whole apparatus of the state, every arm of the state that is not controlled by Milei now, is going to fight tooth and nail to try and disparage him, rake his name through the mud, and stop him using whatever method to to ending the central bank, to ending this nexus of power that they have. I suppose I'm asking for an opinion. Do you think, first of all, do you think he's going to be able to do something so radical? And if so, what do you think the move is? What do you think the strategy might be to do something like this?
So the Latin American republics basically followed the American lead in the first half of the 19th century, and they fought for their independence from Spain, and they basically set up a republican government, which is constitutionally quite similar to the United States. And that is particularly the case in Argentina. Argentina's political system is quite similar to America. They have an elected president, they have a Congress. So legislation's got to begin in the Congress. Now, most politicians are very, very, very good at sniffing the wind. Okay, and so, and jumping on a bandwagon if it's going to be in their political interests to do so. Most politicians have got a bit of ideology about them, but they'll sell that out, no problem, if they're going to get re-elected. So Milei hasn't just won 51%, he's won 56%. Now, it's been a very, very long time since a prime ministerial candidate in Australia has won 56% of the vote. I think the last time, I think Malcolm Fraser didn't get up to 56%. He might have, but certainly Harold Holt did in 1967. This is a long time ago, before I was born. So I think with that emphatic endorsement and the terrible situation, the state of the Argentinian economy, I think that there is a lot of goodwill in Argentina towards Milei. And I think now he does his party, which is only sort of haphazardly created because he realised, he's got more support than he may have imagined at this point. I think they've got about 25% of the Congress. That's a hell of a lot short than the 51% they need to pass legislation, so Milei can sign it off. So, but I think with the others, it's one thing where it's not like the US is where there's just two parties in Congress in the US, Republican, Democrat. In Argentina, there are multi-parties. I think that these people will probably want to go along with Milei 70 to 80% of what he wants, and that's good. That's better than Margaret Thatcher, better than Ronald Reagan. He will still, as the president, get to appoint his cabinet. And those cabinet ministers, secretaries, whatever they call them, they're going to be very powerful. They can sort of, cut down a lot of his spending and sort of, maybe even shut themselves down. A Freuler, as Mr. Milei said, shut down the entire department. So there will be some of that happening. Let's hope that there'll be congressional elections in 2 years' time. So let's hope that his party at that point can then go and get more than 50% of the votes. That'd be terrific. But now, look, the major point I'd like to say is I think that what I'm fearful of here in Argentina is this, that it's not going to be utopia overnight. In fact, there is a very good chance that when Milei brings in his tough medicine, his shock therapy, things are going to probably get worse financially in the short term. And I just hope with all this excitement about Milei that people have accepted that reality. When Thatcher first came to power in 1979, she did bring in a lot of very good reforms, privatizations, tax cuts, and other things. And Britain went into a recession. Now, there had been a previous Conservative government in the early 1970s who tried to bring in similar reforms. The going got tough, and then they famously did a U-turn. Now, Margaret Thatcher, when she brought in her reforms in the very early days, because when you're the Prime Minister of Britain, you actually, there's no president above you, and the House of Lords is not really a Senate. They basically agree with what you say. The Prime Minister of Britain's got a lot of power, more than a US president, more than an Australian Prime Minister, more than Milei. But Thatcher did bring in a lot of good reforms, went into a sharp recession, and everyone said, well, are you going to do a U-turn? And she said, no, I'm not going to do a U-turn because this is going to pay dividends long term. And she was 100% right about that. So what we need to do with Milei, and obviously I'm following the Argentinian media as much as I can, except of course I can't speak Spanish. But I hope that there are voices within Argentina, and I hope the administration of President-elect Milei can make the point as well. This is not going to be easy. This is going to be hard. there is reasonably likely going to be a decline in economic indicators for a reasonably long period. Could be 2 to 3 years. But it's like when you're sick, you got to take the bad medicine. Does not taste good, but it does fix you up long term. That's the key point that I hope that people are. I'm just worried that there is a lot of euphoria in Argentina right now. I think that things are going to get worse in the next 6 to 12 months. That's what I think is going to happen. I think they've got to be bracing for that.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because I actually had that as a question here. The fact that, like, what Austrian economics teaches us is that in a moment of expansionary spending where they devalue the money and whatnot, the boom, that's actually the moment where all the misallocation of resources is created. And the recession, the period of pain, is the cure to all that misallocation of resources. And the more you push that off, the more you put it away, like we're doing here, like they're doing in the US, like Argentina has done up until this point, the worse it'll be when it actually happens. So Milei is going to undoubtedly face, if he does the right things here, yes, absolutely, it's going to be a tougher initial period. And I was going to ask how you thought Milei would market that. I suppose it makes sense. He has to be able to communicate that effectively. I don't know. Are you so optimistic of the powers that be in, like the media and all that sort of apparatus in Argentina? I can see them immediately turning face, and as soon as there is something to latch onto, they'll throw that at Milei and try to, potentially lose him the popular support.
Well, I think what he needs to say is that the message is a very optimistic, hopeful one, is that after we go through some tough reforms, Argentina truly will be great again. Argentina has enormous potential. Argentina was very libertarian in its government from sort of its independence from Spain up until the 1940s. That's when Argentina boomed. Now, Argentina still has a lot of impressive infrastructure. The roads and the bridges and the train lines, and on the one hand, it is a first world country. On the other hand, about a quarter to a third of people live in serious poverty. Okay, so, but it's got a lot of natural resources. It's got a big ocean, lots of fishing and everything else in it. Tourism, mining, it's got everything. Great farming, generally stable politics. I know it's not Somalia, is my point. So the joint has got a lot of potential. With Javier Milei there, it can become the wealthiest country in the world. Okay, on a per capita basis at least. But they just have to get through this little phase. They've got to roll up their sleeves. They've got to bring about a new spirit of entrepreneurialism, which is not something that sort of comes in overnight. This is where Thatcher's greatest strength probably was, more than her policies. Because the truth is, she didn't really cut taxes that much. She didn't really deregulate that much. She was very good on privatization. She was good, okay, but her rhetoric was actually the best thing. She would talk about the glory of capitalism and free enterprise and, free markets. And so it inspired people to say, yeah, I'm going to have a go in business myself. So that was probably her the best thing that she did. So let's look, if Milei gets to a point where they're saying, look, things have got worse, Mr. President, are you going to do a U-turn? Well, we know he's going to say, get stuffed. I don't even know what the word U-turn means. I'm Javier Milei. I'm a force of nature. And I'm a juggernaut, a libertarian juggernaut. So this is, it's why it's all so exciting. And, just this week, Pietro, he's converted to Judaism, or at least very close to it. There were initial reports that he's converted to Judaism. Now, what this tells me is this is a country which is about, 90% Roman Catholic and fairly devout. But he's just gone out there and said, he's all but said he wants to convert to. Look, I think the media reports have been mixed, but there certainly was. New York Post was saying he's decided to convert to Judaism. What this tells me is he's highly unconventional, and he genuinely doesn't care what the mainstream media says. So, look, I think it's going to be a very, very interesting, period of time ahead of us.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen the media call him everything from they were trying to disparage him as like a tantric sex therapist or whatever it was. while he was running. So do you think, obviously Argentina has the enormous benefit over somewhere like Australia of, not benefit rather, but benefit for a libertarian candidate of the economy being so out of sorts, so desperate, like the average person's living conditions are so uncertain. What are they, 140% inflation? Unthinkable amounts of inflation. So, I mean, obviously there's that advantage for a libertarian candidate in Argentina because, they're willing to try something radically different. Now, we're not quite at 140% here, where it's still getting to the point where the average person is thinking it's unmanageable and insane, but there is still this veneer, this facade that the government and the state has that, things are not as bad as they seem. This is maybe transitory. Like, they're still pushing the lie. And I'd say for a lot of people, it's possibly even still believable. Is there something, so I suppose, is it possible for a similar libertarian revolution in Australia right now, or does some more conditions need to be met? What needs to happen next?
It's an extremely good question. It's such a good question, Pietro. I just have to quickly go to the gents. Give me 30 seconds. I'll come straight back. Hang on.
No worries.
Okay, so the question is, does Australia have to sort of get itself into a mess, an Argentinian style mess, before we can have good political leadership, good policy leadership? Well, I very, very, very much hope that is not the case. I mean, how crazy is that? I mean, I fully understand the question, okay? Because what happens when you become wealthy and prosperous, like Australia clearly is that we become policy sloths. And, we get sort of, it's easy for the left to take over because sort of right-thinking people are sort of more interested in business and sort of not interested in politics. They think, politics isn't that important. Australia's so successful. So I'm hoping that Milei can, over the next decade, truly transform Argentina and make it a powerhouse again. So the rest of the world, he can inspire he can have inspiring leadership for the entire world, including Australia. Now, we are on the slow path to an Argentinian mess in this country. There's no doubt about it. I mean, the tax to GDP ratio, when you factor in federal, state, and local government, it's hard to measure. But I mean, God, some very smart people I know write that it's over 50% already. When you factor in tolls and everything else, and so we hope that that Milei can really seriously turn things around. Now, it's really up to us in the Libertarian Party in Australia to make the case to the Australian people, look, we don't want to have to get to this point in Argentina, but we're on that track right now. So please help us turn it around. That's really our job as a political party in this country, so we don't have to be Argentina.
Something else that's interesting about Milei, we've mentioned it a few times already, but I'd like to dig in a little bit further into this. So, a libertarian being elected to the head of a country by itself is, unthinkable, extraordinary, incredible for the ideology. But this isn't just like your run-of-the-mill libertarian. This is not like if Gary Johnson had won in 2016 and, oh, wow, hey, we've got some power in this guy who we agree with on 80%. Might do some things that are actually good. No, Javier Milei is an anarcho-capitalist, the most extreme form of libertarianism, which I know you're a fan of, I'm a fan of, but even within like the broad libertarian community, like this is the libertarians of libertarians, right? This is anarcho-capitalist are viewed by libertarians as the way that libertarians are viewed by the rest of society. So, given this newfound I suppose, platform for even just the name of anarcho-capitalism to be spreading around the world. Like, I don't think most people have even encountered the term prior to Javier Milei being elected and being plastered as such. So there's a lot of misconceptions around anarcho-capitalism. And I think the first thing that people think of when they hear anarcho-capitalism, like anarchy, like you guys would replace our government overlords with companies that tyrannize and monopolize and do unspeakable crimes because otherwise the government doesn't keep us safe. So I think it's good to dispel some of the myths of what anarcho-capitalism is before the media gets the chance to. And of course, the media will take their chances to do so anyway. So I'll give you the floor first of all. So what is anarcho-capitalism to the uninitiated, and then what are some of the lies that we can easily dispel about it?
Well, the word anarchy comes from an old ancient Greek word which simply means no government. Okay, so anarcho-capitalism, it means, that we'd have no state, central state, which is threatening violence on people, but we would very much cherish capitalism, private property rights. Now, when people are not, when they hear that term for the first time, they probably think there'll be no government, but there'll be big bad businesses pushing us around. But when you think about it, I mean, does BHP really push you around? If you don't want their product, you don't have to get it. Does the Commonwealth Bank really push you around? No. If you don't want to engage with the Commonwealth Bank, you don't have to engage with the Commonwealth Bank. Now, what we say is, so people like Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, Milton Friedman, all very good people, they would say government should be a lot smaller than it is, but government is still fundamentally a good thing. We do need government. Okay, so they say government's good, but right wingers have got to control the government, so it's small and efficient and it doesn't intrude much, but it's still fundamentally a good thing. Now, the next step to the right is Ayn Rand, and she says, well, look, government is actually fundamentally bad, but we do reluctantly need it for three things. She said we need it for the courts, we need it for the police, we need it for national defense. Now, further out on the limb is the anarcho-capitalists, who say, you know what, we can actually have all the functions of the government today. Well, a lot of them we just want to get rid of in the first place. But let's say, does everybody believe in young children should be educated? Of course we do. Every single person does. You can be a very bad parent. You can have a heroin addiction and be a parent, and you basically, the great love of your life is still your kid. Okay, you may not be a great parent, but instinctively parents love their children more than anything in the world. So we don't need the state to tell us that our kids need to get educated. Okay, we don't need the state to tell us that we need hospitals. Okay, now the question is, how do we make these things dynamic, efficient, and user friendly? Well, at the moment, the government says, well, the private sector doesn't want to fund these things, so we have to fund it. Well, I believe that if there was a rule if God up on high brought down an 11th commandment, so the 11th of the 10 commandments, and it said there shall be no government, but everything else was the same in the world, except that there's this law of the universe that you're not allowed to have a government. If that was the case, well, do we want roads? Yes, we do want roads. Who's going to build the roads? Well, the people that use them. Okay, and business people are going to build the roads, and who's going to pay the business people? The people that use the roads. Okay, then we'll work this out. Okay, if we're forbidden from having a government, we're going to work it out. And the anarcho-capitalist says, well, it'll actually be better. And that is very much the case with the healthcare system. At the moment, our health is in the hands of government departments, politicians and bureaucrats running it. But look, if we had a free market system, I truly believe that the medical system would be a mile better. It's like with this introduction of Uber. When Uber first wanted to come to Australia, they were very big supporters of the Libertarian Party. They said, look, you guys get what we're talking about. Okay, so we had this old, antiquated, highly regulated taxi industry where people would pay the government a big fee, to get the right to drive people around and charge money for it. So because it was basically their biggest customer was the government, taxis were inefficient. If you rang one up, you'd be lucky if they got there in half an hour. The presentation was not very nice inside cabs. And then you get out at the end of the cab, you've got to muck around for 90 seconds and pay your credit card, and that credit card doesn't work, and then go blah, 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 blah. Then Uber comes along, thanks courtesy of the internet, which is the internet at the end of the day, Pietro, is the libertarian's best friend because it's the most libertarian thing there is. It decentralizes power and knowledge. Okay. So the Uber comes in with the little app, just a little app, okay, and it's cheaper and it's more efficient, okay, and it's and the quality of the service. And Uber, a taxi often has a little bit of a smell about it, okay, because they don't care, okay, but the Uber cars are almost always terrific, okay. So this little example of the superiority of the private sector, which is called Uber, over the highly regulated sector called taxis. And of course, Uber's winning. Of course, Uber's won the war. Now, there'll still always be taxis, okay, for other functions, but the bulk of it will be taken by Uber. Now, this is just one example of how we can replace the state with the private sector and how much better it is. So we think we can do that for all things the government currently does. I think it needs to be phased in over a generation, okay, because we don't want chaos. And I think that Australia can really sort of, along with Argentina, if we can head in that direction, then people will be happy. And anarcho-capitalist states, I think we can say, will never go to war with each other. Okay, I mean, big countries tend to go to war against each other. When big countries tend to go to war with each other, there's rivers of blood. Okay, but if we have, because it's not actually when two countries go to war, it's not the people that hate each other's guts, it's the politicians that hate each other's guts. The politicians are getting into a big fight about something, then they go and send out millions of people to go and get slaughtered because of a political fight.
Yeah, millions of the youngest, the youth, the flower of the youth, off to die. Yeah, no, look, I obviously I agree with you. There's a great point which John Hasnas makes in an essay. I think it was called "The Myth of the Rule of Law," which I really like, where he points out that anything that the state claims is like a right, and that they're the only ones who can provide that service, no matter how absurd it is, over the course of time, if they provide this service and they monopolize this service, people will have it, subconsciously ingrained that without the state, this service couldn't possibly exist. And I think that's what's happened with so many things now. Like, we assume that education, people could not possibly learn without the state, which is an absurdity on its face. But it's kind of perpetuated by the fact that now the government has a monopoly on education. The same thing with roads, the same thing with healthcare. And these are the last things we'd take away. So imagine the first things we'd take away of the ridiculous things that exist with the government. I would like to ask you, so there is a portion of the right wing, and we're deep in what I would call, not what I would call, what most people call the culture wars. This fight for like the soul of our cultures, and a lot of this is caused by the fact that because the state is so all powerful, whoever controls the state gets to push so much of their personal views on so many people. And there's this argument from generally right-wingers and like culturally conservative people, that libertarians, yeah, it's nice that you guys, and anarcho-capitalists, it's nice that you guys are so ideologically pure, but the war here is between, real family human values and the socialist extreme communist left, who want to tear down the fabric of what keeps society together on the whole. So we have to use the state to stop these absolute tyrants, and we can't afford having libertarians removing the state, because we need to win this battle first. So I'm wondering, what's your response to that kind of, have you heard that criticism before?
Yes.
Yeah. What's your response to that?
In every decade, except for perhaps the 1990s, but in every decade over the last 200 years in the English-speaking world, there's always been some extreme political divide between the left and the right, which seems like it's all so important, and we have to sort of put everything aside to win that cultural war. Okay. Now, I say except for the 1990s. Look, what happened in the 1990s, people were saying it was the end of history. There was really not that much to argue about. We had Tony Blair and Bill Clinton as left-wing leaders, but they were very, very sort of, Thatcherite on their economic policy, okay? And there wasn't any big wars. But besides that, there's always something for political people to go head to head over. Now, in the last few years, trans stuff, okay? All this stuff, okay? it's going to be something else next decade. It's always something that thinks, oh, it's the end of the world. It's the end of the world. Okay. I think what libertarians have got to do, we have to, in all of those cultural fights, we have to give the purest view on what our position is. And I think we do that. But I think more importantly is we have to show people, look, let's try to stop thinking about the left-right spectrum. There is a whole new level which transcends which is the simple question, do we really need a government or is it a criminal enterprise? I think people need to, that's how they need to get that thought into their head. Now, if the libertarians aren't talking about that, no one else is going to talk about it. So it's our responsibility to say, look, we may not need a state. The nation state concept has only been around for sort of 200, maybe 400 years. Okay. But everyone's got in their head, oh yeah, the whole world's going to live in countries. They're going to have the state running this part of geography, and it's all just random. Some countries are tiny, some countries are massive. Okay, it's all just random. We need to say, look, I basically do believe that the history of the world is evolving, and generally speaking, heading in a better direction. Now, there's lots of little dips along the way. World War II is pretty bad, etc., etc. But basically, I do have a view where things are getting better. Freedom is increasing. Humans are allowed to sort of flourish more. And I think we need to sort of boldly, like Javier Milei has done, we need to boldly get it out there. Look, don't get distracted by this sort of contemporary debate about, whatever the left and the right are butting heads over now. There is a better way. There is a better way, which is, a government-free society, a fully voluntary society. It'll be more moral, be more dynamic, be more diverse. It'll be a lot more creative.
Yeah, and I mean, Rothbard, I think, kind of breaks it down really simply as well. Is, I mean, there's nothing to stop in an anarcho-capitalist or or a libertarian world. There's nothing to stop small localities from condensing and having the same ideology and the same views, and people choosing where to live according to whichever locations most fit their views. And you can have your lefty communes, and you can have your opposite, super conservative areas, and people would be stupid to pick to live in one which thinks the opposite thing to them. And this choice of where to go and what laws to what social norms are the kind of the law in those areas makes the most sense. I'm aware that you don't have quite as much time today, so this is going to be a bit of a shorter episode. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with? Anything that we haven't mentioned? Anything about Javier or anything before we head off for today?
Well, look, I'm just hoping that the Libertarian Party typically has 2 to 3% of Australians vote for us. Okay, and we saw in the recent Mulgrave by-election where we changed our name from the Liberal Democrats to the Libertarian Party, and that 2 to 3% stuck with us. Okay, so I think you've got about sort of 3 out of 100 Australians at the moment are so smart that they've thought about politics and they've realised, yes, the Libertarians are right. Now, I am absolutely convinced, Pietro, that 25% of Australians are libertarian in their instincts. They're doing other things in life, but if they knew what our message was, they would vote for us. So we got the 2 to 3% of hardcore party members and ideologues and people who know what's going on. And party voters, not just members, but people who are sympathetic to us, and vote for us. They go out of their way in a big long ballot paper. Where's the Libertarians? I want to vote for them. Now, what we need to those people need to sort of the voters need to hopefully join the party, roll their sleeves up, not to get the jab, but roll their sleeves up to do hard work. And, we got to reach that other 25%, who would be sympathetic to what we're saying if we could just make the case. Now, no one is going to make the case for us. It's up to us to do it. And that's what I would encourage people to think about, what practical role they can play in that.
Yeah, and look, thank you for making that case. I think you're doing a fantastic job in New South Wales at the moment. Possibly Javier Milei and his meteoric rise has done something for the libertarian movement here. It'd be interesting to see if we had an election in a few months to see if the broader population encountering the ideas because of him might be a little bit more awakened. That's all stuff we'll have to stay tuned to what's going on to figure out. All right, we'll leave it there for today. If you don't already, please follow us on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify. Thank you so much for your time, John. We will catch you next time.
Perfect. Thanks for having me, Pietro. See you, mate.
See ya.